So let's get to issue one, the virus.
You've heard it 1,000 times. Wash your hands, good hygiene, all of that. But social distancing, keep away. It's going to have no place to go.
The nation is grappling with the COVID-19 coronavirus. First detected in Wuhan City, China last year, the coronavirus shares symptoms with the flu. But this coronavirus is more infectious, with each victim tending to infect 2 to 4 others. Also complicating matters is its incubation period of up to 14 days. Facing around 10,000 US cases now and more than 100 deaths, federal, state and local authorities are pushing people to engage in quote-unquote social distancing. Hand washing is also a major focus. A number of vaccines are now in trial stage, but approval is not expected for at least 12 months.
Let's assess the government's actions thus far and suggest what more can be done. Suraj.
A lot of experts have been looking to South Korea as sort of the prime example as how we should be addressing coronavirus here in the United States. Two obviously big differences here. One, South Korea is not a huge transportation hub like the United States. And secondly, the population is very small, comparatively speaking. The third, I would say that the government in South Korea is probably a little bit more aggressive in terms of how it polices its people. They use a GPS tracking app that if anybody goes outdoors during an isolation or quarantine period, they're basically dinged. You can't really do that here in the United States, given the American people's, the values that they hold with having liberty and freedom,
privacy
and
expectations.
Privacy.
Sure.
So it's a very difficult gap to sort of bridge here. But if people sort of take the responsibility to take this seriously, that's where we can start.
Eleanor?
Well, the president gives himself a 10. I don't think many people would agree with that. I think you can look at everything this government has done and you can say it's too little, too late. The awareness of this coronavirus was evident actually late last year and certainly by January. And so the president says, oh, nobody had any idea that something like this was happening. And then he says he knew it was a pandemic all along. So we've had really sorry leadership coming from the White House. And yes, we can, I don't know whether you call it shelter in place, whether you call it lockdown, but people are limiting their movements. And if you go out in the city, we're here in Washington, D.C., it's a ghost town, so people understand the severity. But frankly, there was too long a period of time where the White House minimized it. Members of Congress minimized it. Meanwhile, they were selling off their stocks because they knew what was coming. And a news apparatus, Fox News, actively perpetrated the notion that this was a hoax to try to minimize the president's election chances. I think Tucker Carlson alone among the hosts, or one of the hosts anyway, right, who took the opposite view. So you have a lot of people out there who still think it's not that serious, the media are hyping it. The president, thankfully, has turned around. He doesn't stick to it all the time, but he has a much more sober, fact-based approach. And yet he talks about, this quinine-based drug might work, and then his FDA commissioner says, no, that hasn't been approved. Right. So there's trouble in this country with trust in government to begin with. It's been eroded over years, and I think people are really anxious, myself included.
Susan, let's talk about Capitol Hill, where you're directly plugged in, and I think that the story regarding Senator Burr is troubling from a public trust perspective. What's your perspective on that, and where do you see Congress going on the next legislative push?
Certainly a lot of people were angry when they saw those reports, and Senator Burr has now come out to say that he made the decision to sell his stock based on public reports and not based on anything he heard that the regular public was not privy to. Some of the other senators involved said that their investments are in private trusts and they had nothing to do with the sale of the stock. Obviously, this story is going to get a lot more attention, a lot more scrutiny. We're going to get a closer look. Probably the Ethics Committee in the Senate will take a look at it as well.
Right.
On Capitol Hill, it's being taken very seriously with this formulation of a massive stimulus plan that's really has moved at lightning speed. Normally, with any spending plan, things tend to move along at a snail's pace with lots of partisan fighting, inter-party fighting. In this instance, all of that's kind of cleared away because they sense, as Eleanor was saying, the fear and the panic. in society about what to do about this. And that's actually, those are the ingredients for Congress to act quickly.
Yeah. Clarence, you know, we've talked about the Congress. Let's talk a little bit also about the White House. The president seemed to check off the box on the Defense Production Act, but didn't really seem to pull the trigger. What are your thoughts and from a substantive standpoint about what was that about, and what's your perspective on how the White House is handling this?
Well, as has been what's somewhat implied by the conversation here, it's been changeable as the president can be. One day he even had a couple of nice words to say about the media. I had to shake my ear to see if I was hearing it correctly, but that all went away by the next morning, you know, and he was back to bashing us again. But he's been trying to get his own footing with this crisis. He functions best when there's a clearly identifiable adversary target that he can play off against. By midweek, that became China. The whole dust-up about the use of his term, China virus, was indicative of how he really seems to be in his comfort zone there playing the adversary. But I sometimes wonder if the right hand listening to the left hand. Anthony Fauci probably has the most impressive credibility right now with the public in general. But does he really talk to President Trump, or does Trump listen to him at all? You wonder about this.
Well, the Defense Production Act that you mentioned that the president has now initiated allows him to order various industries to go on a war footing, not to make missiles, but to make surgical masks and ventilators. And yet, in a briefing, I mean, it seems like he thinks once you invoke it, well, his job is done. And you have governors screaming that they're not getting any of this, and the president said something to the effect that, well, the federal government is not a shipping clerk, that the governors are going to have to work this out on their own. And so they've got this public-private partnership now, but it's just a lot of confusion out there, and you still hear weeks into this, where's the tests? Can't get the test, can't get the surgical supplies. We're the richest country in the world. I mean, I don't get why this hasn't happened. And
you could certainly look at, I mean, just to your point, obviously there are many things that the federal government should be doing. More testing, that's one of the things that South Korea's been trying, that actually worked really well.
Yeah,
is widespread testing,
10,000
a day.
Right.
But to your point about, leaving the governors on their own, President Trump said the federal government will back them and support them. But he said the more effective way for these governors to get, say, ventilators or respirators is to purchase them directly. And that story, that was one of the things that Trump got mad at the media for, as you were saying earlier, Clarence, that this is one of the things that is left out. Important context to how the federal government is dealing with this. Obviously, yes, they can do a better job.
That's fixing blame. That's saying the governors are not doing a good job, and he is in the White House.
I'm not saying that the governors aren't doing a good job.
He has not exerted the full force of the federal government. They are not organized well enough to do
federalism
it.
exists.
I'm grateful Jared Kushner is heading a strike force. That's a good thing.
There are differences that we see within the federal government, and also some differences when you look at this federal versus state. However, there's also been some moments of unity during this national crisis. For example, Mr. Mnuchin working with Nancy Pelosi to make some real headway there. What are some of those examples that we've seen where people are actually able to bridge the gap, come together, and really make some productive change during this moment of national crisis?
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and President Trump. Andrew Cuomo earlier this week, he was praising President Trump for some of the cooperation that they've been building up. I mean, it's obviously important. I was trying to say earlier that federalism exists in this country for a reason, to let the federal government allows the states to operate how they want.
Do you think federalism was the prime motivating factor during World War II?
Well,
this is a little different.
Well, with respect to
final
Republicans are
word.
going to have to put aside a lot of their dogma, and that's why Secretary Mnuchin, he's terrific, because he's not an ideologue, and he's been able to work on Capitol Hill.
That'll have to be the final word on this, but it is very good to end this on a positive note that we do see the sides working together in this moment of national crisis.